Welcome to Season 2 of the Lipoedema podcast, hosted by Shell and Tiana. Our aim is to make noise around lipedema and educate as many people as we can about this disease.
Our guest list contains professionals who work in the field and women who live with lipedema. Thank you for joining us.
Dr. Tara Karnezis has over 15 years' experience in research leadership, heading scientific programs with commercial application at Stanford University and Peter Mac. She is an expert in vascular biology, as in an internationally significant track record, including publications in Nature, Cancer Cell, and Nature Neuroscience. Dr. Karnezis and her team published a paper titled Key Signaling Networks Are Dysregulated in Patients with Adipose Tissue Disorder Lipedema in the International Journal of Obesity in 2021, and continues to passionately pursue further research to establish the root cause of lipedema. Welcome back to the Lipoedema podcasts. We are your hosts, Shell
and Tiana, and today we are joined by our special guest, Tara Karnezis. Tara, thank you so much for joining us and welcome.
Lovely to be here. It is a great honor indeed to be talking to you both about something I am very passionate about.
Tara, how did you come to learn about lipedema?
You know, I was reflecting about that the other day. I think it would have been in 2016. We attended a conference in Darwin, and it was the Lymphedema conference. The Australian Lymphedema Association had a conference there, and there was a very small section on lipedema. They weren't even presenting it. It was basically the Lipedema Foundation, the Australian Lipedema Foundation. They had a little booth, and I was curious because at that time it was largely thought that lipedema was a complication of lymphedema, the swelling of your legs. And of course, you know, years later, that doesn't seem to be full explanation, but that's kind of where I was first intrigued. That's where I first found out about it. And it was a very small, no one really knew what it was. It was just this tiny booth, a couple of ladies in purple, that's their color, just trying to build awareness about their suffering and their condition.
And from there, how did that evolve for you? Like after that, like that piqued your interest, like this.
Yeah.
How did it evolve from there?
So from there, I guess at that time, I've been the core research interest that I've had for the last nearly 15 years was lymphatic diseases and lymphedema. So people that have been congenital lymphedema, that born with that condition, and then the ones that develop it post cancer therapy. So we were interested in understanding, how that happens, why that happens, and potentially looking for therapeutic avenues. So I guess from that perspective, because there was that lymphatic connection at that time, I think that's where I started to develop an interest in it, because I thought, oh, hang on, this might be another lymphatic disease that might be really interesting for us as a research team to start investigating. And I think that's where it sort of came about. It was at that, random moment in Darwin with a tiny little booth and just my curiosity. And that's kind of where it started. And from there, I was met by an anonymous this lady approached me, and she said to me, "Oh, I really like your talk. I like what you're doing. I'm going to donate money to your lab." And I thought, oh, that's nice. That's really, I really appreciate public donations and people that understand the purpose of what it is that we're trying to do. And it wasn't just a tiny, it wasn't a $50 donation. We're talking hundreds of thousands of dollars. So this woman was actually serious. And the reason why she was serious is that she's a sufferer of the disease lipedema. So she was actually interested in, she must have seen something in what we were doing that struck a chord. And she gave us this very generous donation. So I took that very seriously at that time. I thought, well, there's clearly a need for it. This woman is generous enough to give all this money to us. We're going to put it to really good use. And that's where the Lipoedema Research started from. That's where it began, with this generous donation. And then we just kind of grew out from there.
That's so fascinating how that's where it started from. And so lipedema, when our chat with Jen Bartlett and Lipoedema Australia, we touched a little bit on how expensive research projects are. But just for our community, can you explain how the research process has come about? Like, what is the process to do a piece of research?
If you look back on history, there's a really lovely example of throughout, thousands and hundreds of, 5,000 years ago, 2,000 years ago, 100 years ago, there's always been, people are curious. Some people are just born with curious mind. We've had, Aristotle, Galileo, they people that are interested in asking why. At that time, research is more about it wasn't something you did because you had to earn money. It was more progressing humanity and humankind. It was more like fulfilling your purpose in life. And it was usually aristocratic people dabbled in it because they had the means to do so. Modern day science is a little bit tricky. We're relying on funding from the government and philanthropic agencies. And it's expensive and it takes a long amount of time because the reagents, consumables, personnel, they're expensive. And it's not actually giving you a return in terms of, you're not generating an income, you're not selling, you're not making profit. It is purely a cash burn, to use a better word, business. But for that cash burn, you're actually getting knowledge. And from that knowledge, you can actually develop businesses and that lead you into pathways such as therapeutics and, lots of medicines were discovered from basic research. So I guess all this to say is it's expensive because it costs a lot of money to get the reagents that you need to carry out an experiment. It takes a lot of money to pay someone, a scientist, to do the experiments, to give you the answers that you need. And everything takes time because it's like a jigsaw puzzle. You start with one piece and then you build it out and then you have to keep putting the pieces together. And at the end, usually you get a really nice picture of what's going on. So in the case of lipedema, we started with nothing. All we started with was, well, this is a disease. It looks interesting. People think about it in terms of its obesity. But when you talk to these women, you get a very clear sense of it can't be a simple case of obesity. These women have been trying to lose weight all their lives, unsuccessfully. In some cases, they have this very obvious shape that once you start looking, you can't really miss it. So usually very thin on top and much larger below. And often the adipose tissue tends to grow at a time of hormonal changes. So, for example, a lot of the patients, when you talk to them, they will tell you their first experience or their first sign that something was not quite right was during puberty. And of course, we know what happens during puberty. There's a huge change of hormones. So that seems to be a trigger. And that's when often people notice that onset is during puberty. And then as you develop as a woman, you can go through all sorts of additional hormonal changes, and then you see changes again in the sort of fat distribution of your lower legs, and that's where they start seeing these changes, and that sort of stands to reason that hormone imbalance seems to be a trigger for this disease. And from that, we can say that perhaps it's not a simple case of obesity, and as a result, the research that we do is trying to tease that apart, because I'm convinced I have a very strong opinion on this, that these women, it can't be explained by a simple case of, okay, you're eating too much or you're not exercising enough. It's not obesity, it's something else. So our research is showing that that's the case. we can see clear differences between the tissue that we obtain from obese patients and the tissue that we obtain from lipedema patients. It's very clear differences that we are using as a foundation to build our understanding of the disease and build out that jigsaw that I referred to earlier on. So eventually we want to get to a point where we really understand how, why, what's going on, and how we can use this information to try to develop therapeutic agents, to stop that fat from growing. And more importantly, I feel diagnostics is something that needs to be addressed really urgently, because it will help doctors diagnose their patients with the disease and therefore put into plan a better management system for them.
Yeah, fantastic, Tara. You touched on the fat the words were the fat growing, and I'm so curious. Do we know whether it's our healthy body fat that then whatever the process is turns it into diseased fat, or do we just always have it as a diseased connective tissue and it just exacerbates over time?
Yeah, that's a really good point. If I had to sort of dissect that question, I would say it would be a very interesting experiment to have access to patients at the beginning of onset. And, these patients would be early teens, they'd be teenagers, right? So no one really knows. No one's going to know. No one's going to say to you, you've got lipedema at that age. You're going to go through life, and then at some point you're going to get diagnosed with it. But ideally what we would like to do is kind of do a time course experiment where we're looking or interrogating or investigating tissue at the onset, 10 years later, 20 years later, to see what changes are occurring, and then compare that to sort of equivalent obese tissue. That's a long-term experiment. You can appreciate when I say earlier how research takes time. It's because disease etiology takes time to develop into a full-blown disease. So that would be really, that would be ideal. But to answer your question, from our studies so far, even taking a snapshot at a later point in time, so we're talking like stage 2, stage 3 disease, where it's pretty obvious, it's starting to impact people's quality of life. For us, there are it's like very clear differences between lipedema and obese in terms of the sort of the type of connective tissue it is, the fact that the stem cells. So stem cells, I'll explain what they are. Basically, we all harbor stem cells in our body. They are essentially plastic type cells that can become anything, like a neuron, like a muscle cell, like a blood vessels, if you trigger them in the right way. So they can become anything with the right triggers. Now, it turns out in lipedema fat, and adipose does have a lot of stem cells in it, because with the right triggers, those stem cells become adipose tissue and they grow when triggered. But in the case of lipedema, what we found is that the stem cells within the adipose tissue, there's a lot more of them. And not only is there a lot more of them, they're very quick to respond to all sorts of triggers. So you can imagine a perfect storm. If you've got a hormonal change, you've got this tissue that's kind of primed for the fat to start expanding out. And I think that's kind of a key finding for us, because that suggests to us it's not normal fat. It's just not normal tissue. That's not something it's not something that develops as a result of obesity. It's something that's an inherent part of your genetic makeup. And we're trying to understand those genes a little bit more, but it's not an easy area, because there's not a smoking gun. It seems to be many things that are going to be lined up perfectly before you start seeing this disease progress.
Yeah, you've certainly picked a very complex interest, being it like a mainly woman's disease, and if it's impacted by hormones, the hormonal processes that women go through is like so complex, which is why they don't study us in the first place.
Yeah.
You've got your work cut out for you, it sounds.
I do like a challenge. And once you get into it, you realize, I mean, it sort of draws you in, and I think it's us largely driving this, awareness, and because of, our team and that sort of interest, we publish manuscripts. We go out there and we talk about the disease. It's becoming, and thanks to social media, that sort of, you can get the word out. People are more aware of it now. There's more interest in it. It's not just something that gets hidden and tucked away, and it's actually, people are starting to become, oh well, how do we get on board here? Like, we attended a conference a few months ago in Germany, and that was the first Lipoedema Congress. And that was essentially thought leaders from around the world. And there were a lot of thought leaders there. There was like at least 500 people. So you can imagine those 500 people are going to be doing their little bit of research. All of a sudden, you've got a critical mass. It's starting to become, there's starting to become traction. And as a result of that traction, government is going to start taking notice. Money will start coming in. More research will be done, which means more data, more information, and then hopefully a cure at the end of it. That's what we're all aiming towards. So
absolutely, we all want a cure.
The other thing I was going to say is, from a science perspective, I'm sort of stepping back, and you might want to give me some feedback here. From the patient journey perspective, I mean, what's your experience in and how it has impacted people's lives, your lives? I mean, what's your story with all of that?
In regards to being diagnosed,
yeah,
or finding out that lipedema was even a thing, like I think that's the hardest part. Even knowing that it exists, which is why we are all here. Like, we are all here trying to let more people know. But for me, because I was the typical 48-year-old woman when I got diagnosed, so I had spent my entire life just thinking I was deformed. So when I found out about lipedema and that, oh my goodness, this explains what's wrong with my legs and my hips, it was like empowering. Like, for me, it was the most empowering thing. And then this all happened, and so it was amazing for me. But I can understand, like, other women, maybe, something else that's wrong with me. Like, we are all so different. But for me, it was very empowering.
Yeah, and I think that's the key. Like, what I'm realizing as well is, I do like, the reason why I'm very sort of drawn to this research is because I can put faces to the disease. It's not something you just go in your lab and forget about the actual patient. I have strong contact with Lipoedema Australia, and they are, I mean, I love hearing about everyone's kind of life and how it has impacted their life when they first were diagnosed, what it means for them. Like, it's really nice to hear you say it empowers you. And I'm thinking, knowledge and information should empower you. That's the whole point, right? So I think, to have, it's not just research done in the backyard of some, sort of not dark corner in an institute no one knows about. There's a lot of integration between research, clinical people, and patients. It's like a trio that all work together, which I really think, if you want to get something done, just help with a disease, cure a disease, you need to have those three aspects. You need to have research, you need to have the clinical people, and you need to have patient advocacy. We've got that for lipedema. So I have big hopes that, with all of us working together, we'll eventually reach a point where, we'll be having a podcast, we'll be talking about something else instead.
Yeah, we've cured that one. What are we going to talk about
Let's
now?
move on to something else.
So,
that's right.
So you've been researching this for a long time. So
Yeah.
how does your research evolve? Is it like you have an aim and an objective, and once you figure that out, it like the next thing comes about?
Yes, exactly like that. You start with a very simple question. My question at the beginning was, is this the same as obese fat? If I look at the patient, I can see differences. Like I can see differences in my own eyes. What's the deal there? Like what are the differences? So that's the first question. Trying to sort of make a list of similarities and differences. So we've done that. So that you have that basic foundation of information there. And then you ask yourself, well, this is interesting, this area of like the stem cells, for example. Why is that happening? And then you design experiments to answer that particular question. And the data, the information you get from that experiment is going to lead you to ask a different question and then a different set of experiment. And then it just keeps going on and on and on until you have a very clear understanding of not everything, probably one part of a bigger picture. At some point, you need to sort of put, how can I say this? It's not just going on forever. You have to have, there needs to be an end point where you address the reason, the cause, or the purpose that you sort of set out to in the first instance. So, as I said, for us, it was more about trying to sort of understand, is there a way to kind of exploit these differences so that we can design better therapies? Is there a way that we could, are there those differences, again, we can exploit to sort of help with the diagnostic aspect of it as well? So, ideally, wouldn't it be nice if the doctor just says, we're just going to take a blood test and we're going to test X, Y, and Z, and there's a panel, and if you have that, and as a result of that, we're going to, recommend this course of management or therapy. That's what that's the vision I have, and that's what I'm working towards. And not just me, my colleagues as well are all working towards that common goal.
Oh, wouldn't that be fascinating? Like, we can educate doctors, but giving them the actual, the panel that they have to take of bloods to say, look, this will let you know if your patient does have or is likely to have lipedema. That would be amazing.
How cool would that be, right? Yeah.
And so with all this research, at what point, like this is for me because I've just done my master's and been in that literature review thing. So at what point do you publish a paper?
Yes, that's a really good point. So science these days, it's a very competitive space. You have to have basically answered a very significant biological question if you want to get published in those really high impact journals that we're all striving towards. These are Nature, Cell, Science, those three, the holy trinity. For publications to get into that caliber of journal, you need to have basically answered a very specific mechanistic question. In our case, what drives lipedema? So, if you answer something like that, that would make it big time. For other, if you had a clinical angle as well, that would also help publish. I suppose what you want to have is data that's reproducible, because you're peer reviewed, and usually at least there are 3 or 4 independent people evaluating your work. You want to make sure it's robust. You want to make sure it's reproducible. You want to have all those details crossed off. You want to be able to answer a question, your hypothesis is answered at the end of the day, and put it together in a nice discussion at the end of it, so it kind of puts it all into context, and then you're kind of maybe thinking about what you want to do next. So that would make a really nice publication. And when you have all that, I would be that's what we do as a scientist. We do that every few months. We want to try and get publications out. So that's what I'd be looking for if I was to publish something. And that's what we've done with some of our lipedema work as well. We've got a few publications that are in press, ready to be reviewed, accepted, so on and so forth.
Oh, that's exciting. And so what is your latest research? What are you working on right now?
Yeah. So right now, you have to be aware of all the cutting edge technology that's available to you now. So um, we're always on the lookout for new big sort of tech platforms that you can use to answer a specific question. So at the moment, there's something called, which is becoming more and more mainstream, but essentially what it does is this technology that isolates every single cell that make up our tissue, and it gives you these maps. So you get an impression of, okay, there are stem cells, there are blood endothelial cells, there's fibroblasts, there's skin. You get a map of not only what's there, but the proportions of what's there. So we're doing that with lipedema. Actually, we've done that with the tissue from lipedema. So we've got a sense of all the sort of cells that make up the adipose tissue. Step one. The next thing we've done is we asked a very simple question. What cells sort of interact with each other that potentially like they interact with one another to drive the disease, right? Because at the end of the day, there's something going on with the cells in that tissue. They're not communicating well with one another, or they're communicating too much with one another. Essentially, they're encouraging themselves to grow fat. So we are understanding what are the cell interactions that are driving this disease. And we've got some really nice clues that are starting to make sense finally of what's going on there. So that's where we're focusing our energy on at the moment, which is really exciting. Some really nice data coming out.
That is exciting. There's so much involved, isn't there? It's more than just like, oh, write a paper and see if someone reads it.
Well, I think you have to be prepared to do a bit of marketing, right? You have to get out there, and like what we're doing now at our institute, we've got a communications team, and you pitch them what you're doing and you give them keywords, and if it sparks their interest, they'll put it out into mainstream media. It might get picked up by big sort of networks, and that's how it starts. I mean, you have to do that. Otherwise, if you don't, it becomes this obscurity in the background. And we have a mission. We're out to make people aware of this disease. We're out to make people aware of the fact that we're doing some really amazing research in Australia. And as a result, we have to utilize this, communications and marketing people to kind of help put that message out there, because we want traction in this disease. Otherwise, we're not going to be able to go with full momentum without having that sort of, back up and people and aware of what's going on. We have to. So I use it. I mean, I think it's smart if you use it in a way that helps propel and expose your research. It's really important to do that. And in this case, even more important.
Yeah, it's a necessary beast,
I'm
isn't
sure
it? The
you
whole
agree.
marketing and PR stuff.
Exactly. And I think, with technology now, like social media and the fact that we're doing this, and it's going to get out to hopefully, people either affected or interested, the word will get out, and I'm hoping that it will attract, interest in what we're doing, and then from there, things will grow, good things will happen. So I really enjoy.
Yeah, definitely some positive things for the future. And speaking of the future, we're only in January. Well, I suppose when this episode comes out, we'll be in February. But what does 2024 look like for your work?
That's a really good question. So I think for our work is to basically, we would like to understand, as I said to you, the cells that are responsible, how they interact, how the architecture of the tissue works in lipedema in patients. So we're going to be spending the next year getting that all, interrogating that aspect, and then getting our publications out as as quickly as possible. So it's going to be a busy year, and it'll go quick, I'm sure, like every other year goes so fast. So, but before the end of that, it will be December, and I'll be saying, oh, let's see what we've achieved. So that's what we're working towards.
So, Dr. Rahman touched on the fact that there's a lot of people involved in research, and that you've joined with other forces so that you can all work together. How much does it cost, if you can tell me a ballpark figure, how much does it cost to undergo a research project?
Yeah, and I can tell you that because I have to write grants, and part of the grant writing process is getting your financial statements in place. So let me give you a ballpark. Say for a 3-year project on an aspect of lipedema, in general, it will probably be around $800,000 for 3 years worth of work. Wow. Just to give you a sense of what it costs. And that's not, everything you want to do. That's just a portion of it. Yeah. So that's rough guide. If you want more money and a broader sense of, getting money to do the stuff that you really want to do, like have a whole program in place. To do that, you would align yourself or collaborate with external partners and other researchers. So maybe you might get a group of 5 together. You could probably, a program typically would give you around $2 to $3 million for about 5 years. So that will give you a nice coverage, and collaboration is always the way to progress things quickly. So it's expensive. At the end of the day, whichever way you look at it, it's expensive.
Yeah. And were you able to, like at the Lipoedema Congress, were you able to make some connections that really is going to help?
The whole point of attending these conferences is firstly to be aware of what other people are doing. Secondly, when you spot someone that's doing something that may benefit you or you may benefit them, you approach them and you establish a collaboration, and that's how it works. So usually it's always a team effort for research. Yeah.
Tara,
so we'll be attending a few more conferences
just go back a little bit
and
and touch on the fact
we'll be doing in 2024. There's a few lined up for us.
Oh, well, that's good, because we're going to be attending the Lipoedema Australia conference, so we'll be very happy to see you there.
I'll see. I think I'm going to be talking there or presenting, so I'm really looking forward to that. And I'll get to see you and talk to you in person. It'll be nice. Yeah.
Oh, we can't wait.
Yeah. So, what does this all mean for you, though? As what does this all mean? Like this research, this clinical insight. How does that make you?
I think ultimately, for if I'm speaking selfishly, and I've already been through 2 surgeries, but the ultimate goal for me would be is to not have to do any more surgeries, I suppose.
Yeah.
And to be able to nip it in the bud some other way. And whilst conservative management is doing a great job, and the surgeries have done a great job, it's a treatment, not a cure. Like, it's taking me back to stage 1, and that's being quite kind. It really depends on how much respect I show my body every day. And there's obviously variables like stress and trauma that we don't have much control over that can really influence how we present moving forward, and especially in a woman's body and especially in a woman's psyche, that's very hard to remain stress-free and chill. So, I don't know what my future holds in terms of my lipedema.
It's interesting you say that. Yeah, I think you've kind of touched on a very important subject, which is the surgical aspect of it. I've seen these surgeries being performed because I'm there usually collecting tissue or patient specimens. They're not a simple procedure. I think people need to understand that it's not something that's an easy thing to go through. And there's a long recovery period, and it doesn't end once. You've got to do both legs. So I completely, sympathize with you about how it's a difficult thing to go through. And so, yeah, you're right. It would be nice to have something a little bit of an alternative possibility out there. So that's really interesting. I didn't realize you went through the surgeries. Yeah.
And for me, I'm really excited to be able to definitively say not obesity, lipedema, because that is just, and I think a lot of our community have been up against that their entire lives. Like, just eat less, move more. Nah, there's nothing wrong with your legs. Nah, this, and if you have got secondary obesity, they're not even going to worry about the pain in your legs and your knees and your hips. It's like, oh, it's because you're fat. So for me personally, who has struggled with my weight since I was in grade 6, like that is just going to be a game changer. And I can see so many young lives being a lot different if they know definitively at an early age that, oh, you're not obese, that, you know, there is this condition and we can test for it.
Yeah, and I think that's the other point is, you know, physical attribute, a physical symptom aside, there's also, I mean, the pain aspect that people don't really fully appreciate. And I don't know if, I mean, I'm sure you've experienced it at some point, but that's the other thing you hear a lot about, the extreme or in some cases debilitating pain that, I mean, how on earth would that even be? You know, obese people don't complain about that level. It's not something that, yeah. So again, when you start looking at it in a very objective way, it's different. It can't be obesity, but you know, it's like everything. It gets lumped into one thing. We can put it there and explain it, and that's the end of that. Just kind of tuck it away. But I think for people that are going through it, it's not an answer. Yeah, not acceptable just to put it under one banner and leave it there.
Yeah, yeah. And it's that education of doctors too, which I think Lipoedema Australia is doing amazing with. So at least more doctors are knowing about it and can, you know, at least point their patients in the right direction. And but yeah, there is still a lot to do.
There's a lot to do. Yeah, there's a lot to do, and I think that's you touched on a really good point there. It's you know, public awareness is one thing, but at the end of the day, the patients need to go to their local GP in order to get somebody to assess them. So I think that's a critical piece, you know, of focus that I believe strongly needs more work to be done to get that message out to the GP community, because that's your first point of contact. And then, you know, the specialist doctors that end up doing or performing the surgery, I mean, they're a bit more aware, but it's usually, you know, the thousands of GPs that are qualified GPs, that it'd be nice for them to be a bit more aware of it as well when people come in, so they know. So I think, you know, again, social platforms are really good to educate clinicians. Having combined conferences with clinical people and scientists can sort of merge and discuss things helps us all about. What's your hope for 2020?
Oh,
I'm turning it around on you now.
I know, look at you. So we want to grow our audience. We want to find all of those women living and in suffering and not knowing that lipedema exists. We want to, wherever they're hiding, we want to try and find them. So that is a mission that we have.
How do you do that? How do you kind of get into, how can you reach the people that aren't necessarily tech savvy, social media savvy? How do you sort of do that?
That's it. We've almost got to get into people's faces, don't we?
Yeah.
Like actually meet people. So mums groups, you know, school drop-off times, like anywhere where you see a bunch of women who are gyms, maybe, you know, female gyms. Maybe we need to hit
That's
them
a
up
great
and
idea. Yes.
Oh.
I love this.
Don't hold me to that, Tara.
No, but it's just thinking out aloud, right?
Yeah.
I mean, because, you know, you want to be able to reach as many people as possible. Like you say, the ones that are suffering in silence. So that's kind of a heartbreaking thought. And, you know, in this day and age, there's no excuses. Everyone's reachable in some way, capacity. So I like that idea. I think it's a really good one.
I think also as we progress with our conservative management strategies and we do it with pride, like wearing our compression with pride and going to MLD and, you know, having really nourishing food in front of us with, you know, people around us or whatever, and we start having that conversations about health, our health and stuff with our peers and our friends, it naturally progresses into some sort of awareness piece because we're just being real. Like, oh, I noticed that you have compression on. Were you burned? Or like, what's that for? And you can start actually talking about why you wear compression. Instead of hiding what we're doing, we can actually just do it with pride, and that will sort of perpetuate some form of awareness in itself.
So just put it out there. Wear it like a badge of honor.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a conversation starter.
It is a conversation starter. When you're at the gym or when you're picking up your children and you're wearing your badge of honor, someone will ask. And then before you know it, you'll have that conversation. Yeah, that's great.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, that's excellent, ladies.
Thank you.
It's, I really enjoy, I mean, from my perspective, again, meeting you both, having this discussion, putting it all into context, it brings about that whole circle of, you know, why you do all this stuff in the first place. We could all be just sitting back, you know, watching something, and we're out trying to make impact, right? So I really appreciate what you're doing.
Oh, we'll really appreciate what you're doing because you're effectively going to help us find a diagnostic tool and eventually a cure. So amazing. We can't be here without you.
Yeah. Excellent.
All right, Tara. So where can the lipedema community find you?
So my research lab is based at St. Vincent's Institute in Melbourne. We're part of the O'Brien department, which is a plastic surgery unit. And if anyone wants to come and have a chat, my door is always open. You can, I mean, you might have my details, like my email and so forth, if people just kind of want to contact you, and you can forward them my email. And happy to chat. We can have a coffee and a nice conversation about where all this is going.
That sounds amazing. If I was in Victoria, I would absolutely be doing that. And
where are you physically?
Well,
where are you
based?
I'm
on the south side of Brisbane, and Shell's at the Gold Coast. So, but we will be in Melbourne in July.
In June. July. In June. Wonderful.
Thank you so much, Tara, for your time.
So
we've had such a blast talking to you. And look, Michelle and I didn't really do much prep for this discussion with you because we don't know much about research, and the conversation just progressed so naturally, and we got so much information from you. We're truly grateful. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. It was lovely. It was a pleasure to speak to you today.
Amazing. All the best. We'll see you in June, July.
See you in June. Bye.
When we started the Lipoedema podcast, we relied on word of mouth and existing connections.
Our following has happened organically, and we are so honoured by your support.
As we learn more about the world of social media and algorithms, we have a request.
When you are listening to our podcast or watching on YouTube, let us know what you think.
Hit follow or subscribe.
Leave us a comment or write a review.
The more engagement we get, the more our message is shared.
And the greater our reach to those women suffering in silence.
Thank you for listening to the Lipoedema podcast. Lipedema and its symptoms vary from individual to individual. The opinions and advice voiced in this podcast are of a personal nature and used for educational purposes.
Please take away from this podcast what resonates with you, and please see your GP or preferred specialist for diagnosis and healthcare. We are Shelley and Tiana from the Lipoedema podcast. Until our next episode, bye for now.